Tens of thousands of home buyers face an anxious wait to see if they can complete the purchase of their new home before the end, or at least the beginning of the end, of the stamp duty concession in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced the temporary stamp duty cut last summer. He said it would stimulate the property market and the jobs that depend on it. And in March he extended it to the end of June. But now time is running out for people to save potentially thousands of pounds. Dan Whitworth's here. Dan, what changes happen at the end of this month?
Well, the big date for people's diaries, Paul, is Wednesday, 30th of June. Now, that's the day house sales must be completed for people to be able to take full advantage of the stamp duty holiday in England and Northern Ireland and the temporary tax reduction period, as it's called, on the land transaction tax in Wales. As for Scotland, the temporary relief for the land and buildings transaction tax ended as planned on 31st of March.
And how much difference will the end of this tax relief make to people? What kind of money are we talking about?
Well, I think the best way for me to try to explain that is to tell you about Stephanie. Now, she and her family, Paul, are in the process of buying a 4-bedroom, semi-detached house in South Oxfordshire. Now, if the purchase goes through, but they miss the deadline, they will pay more than £10,000 extra in tax. Now, if the purchase doesn't go ahead, they'll lose thousands of pounds they've already paid toward getting their new home.
If we were to complete before the 30th of June, we would be liable for £6,250 in stamp duty. If it were to happen after the 30th of June, it would be £18,750. So a 12.5% increase on top of losing probably in the region of £10,000 in other costs for solicitors' fees, surveyors, removals firms. So yes, it would be pretty devastating.
Now, Stephanie's deal was done back in March, leaving plenty of time to get it over the line for a scheduled completion date of 25th of June. But a last-minute problem has cropped up, which could end up costing them and others in the chain thousands.
Our buyers have had to refer about a very small issue to their lender, and the delays at the lender are putting the whole chain in jeopardy. If any one part of the chain doesn't have the availability of funds to top up the stamp duty, if we go over the 30th of June, then the whole chain will collapse.
Well, that's how things look for Stephanie. And Dan, what happens to the tax exactly from the 1st of July?
OK, so it's a 2-step process, Paul. Up to 30th of June, people in England and Northern Ireland don't pay any stamp duty on the first £500,000 of a purchase price. From 1st of July to 30th of September, that drops to £250,000. And from October, it just goes back to normal, where you pay no stamp duty on just the first £125,000. Now, above those figures, you're charged a gradually increasing percentage.
Thanks, Dan. Well, listening to that is Helen Hutchison, conveyancing partner at Irwin Mitchell in Sheffield. Helen Hutchison, is Stephanie's problem a familiar one to you?
It certainly is, unfortunately, particularly where clients are involved in chains. Various issues have come to light over the last few weeks, delays with mortgage lenders, searches and the like, which mean that if only just one party can't proceed, a whole chain could collapse or potentially be delayed.
Yes, and there always do seem to be the odd problems, don't they, with house buying. And what's the market like at the moment, then, for people rushing to complete by the deadline?
It's absolutely frantic at the moment. We've been very busy. The industry overall has probably seen the busiest time in the last, certainly in the last 22 years I've worked in the industry.
And are some clients telling you to cut corners to get their purchase over the line?
Some clients are more prepared to take a view on certain issues to make savings. However, that's more difficult if a client's reliant upon a mortgage to buy a property.
Sure. Well, also with us is property specialist Henry Pryor. Henry Pryor, there are claims that 50,000 people are wondering if they'll meet that 30th of June deadline. Perhaps like Stephanie, because an unexpected problem has been found. Does that figure sound right to you?
Paul, good afternoon. I suspect that's actually an underestimate. There are figures being bandied around within the industry that there are 700,000 transactions in the pipeline trying to push their way through a process that doesn't have a great deal of elasticity. And that's why we are finding that conveyancers, surveyors are all struggling to try and cope with the excess demand.
Now, the Chancellor said he was doing this to, quote, stimulate the property market and indeed the jobs that depend on it. Was that a sensible intervention?
Well, it depends who you ask. I suspect that many people, particularly professionals like conveyancers, like building surveyors, would suggest that the stimulus ought to be labelled an illegal substance. It's had an extraordinary impact, contributing to the current house price inflation, which is presently running at just over 8%, according to the Office for National Statistics. I'm not sure that the stamp duty holiday is responsible for the whole of that increase, but the Office for Budget Responsibility, when this initiative was announced last July, predicted it would push house prices up, they thought, by roughly 2%.
Yes, but when it ended in Scotland, because as Dan said, it ended in Scotland on the 31st of March, that did bring prices down, didn't it? Do you expect house prices to, well, not exactly plummet, but certainly ease off or fall at the 1st of July and then the 1st of October when it finally ends?
Annual house price inflation in Scotland has fallen from over 10%, Paul, to 6.3% over the last 12 months. I expect that in England we'll see a similar fall in the acceleration of house prices, but it doesn't look, given the current data we have, that house prices in actual terms are likely to fall in the short term at least.
So these savings aren't illusory. People are saving tax and indeed, but they may be paying more for the home, may they, or might they not?
Well, this is the irony, of course. People think that they are saving perhaps a maximum of £15,000 in order to buy a property that is, statistically at any rate, costing on average £24,000 more than it did in June last year. An irony not lost on many, particularly estate agents who are rushing around doing deals and trying to get these transactions sorted. We saw a spike in March where typically, on average, 97,000 homes would sell. This March, ahead of the original deadline that had been set, we saw nearly 180,000 transactions. And I expect we'll see a similar spike at the end of June.
Yes, and Stephanie, we've had a tweet from, well, I suppose he's anonymous really, he's called Beagle Bugle anyway, and he said some houses in his community have all dropped prices by £20,000 on a 350,000 property. Are house prices, in your experience, already beginning to ease off? Helen?
I've not seen house prices falling off yet, but whether that will happen come the 30th of June remains to be seen.
Right. And it is worth saying, though, isn't it, that we're talking with Stephanie, we're talking about an expensive house. If your house is worth $250,000 or less, you don't have to worry, do you? Because you'll get the concession until the no stamp duty concession in England and Northern Ireland until the end of September.
That's right. So buyers of properties up to £250,000 will still benefit from a discount until the end of September.
And I've had another tweet from, Veni Vidi Vici, probably Julius Caesar himself. The market's frothing, and if the government doesn't stop it, the Bank of England has to intervene. Henry Pryor, is there a need for intervention in this frothy market?
No, I think that so long as we don't find clever politicians succumbing to some lobbyists who would still like the stamp duty holiday to be extended yet further, we'll find that the market does adjust and returns to some sort of normality. We have got some big concerns that house price inflation is running too hot, and there are murmurs from the Bank of England that interest rates are being readied and sharpened in case they continue to do so. But I think it's important for those who are involved in transactions, who are trying to push their conveyancers to get completion before the end of the month, that understand that there are other ways of dealing with this. You can, of course, look at the whole chain, accepting slightly lower prices all the way through and allow those transactions to go. And also worth remembering that there are probably 50% more transactions in the pipeline that already know they're not going to meet that deadline, which is perhaps why I think that at the end of the day we're going to see prices continue roughly where they are for at least the remainder of this year.
So you think that price rises are still on the cards even after the stamp duty holiday ends?
House price inflation reflects, Paul, the deals done by people who are buying and selling homes, and they're going to continue to buy those properties and pay more through the remainder of 2021.
And Helen Hutchison, do you agree with that? In a word, do you think that's going to happen?
I hope so, yes.
You hope so. OK, Henry Pryor, Helen Hutchison, thanks very much.